Okay, so let's see. So let's wrap up chapter 4, and then maybe I'll ask, I'll let you ask questions about chapter 4, and then because we're going to have midterm next Tuesday, it will be from chapter 1 to chapter 4. So I want to make sure you understand the stuff, in particular the problem sets. You had tutorial yesterday, right? I hope the TA has explained to you the answer to the first 3 questions. But if you have any questions, still have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Okay, but then if there's no more questions, I'll just move on to chapter 5 today. Okay. So let's see. So yesterday we have almost. Last time before the break, we have almost completed chapter 4. So we talk about temporary versus permanent change in money supply, and the distinction between short run and long run, right? It's very important to distinguish between short and long run, and the effect is very different. And as a result, we get this diagrams, and we see that there's overshooting. Okay, overshooting explains the volatility. Okay, the volatility of why. So you see that exchange rate. So the blue curve is exchange rate. You can see that the red curve price level. Here, this is actually the relative price level. So it's the month-to-month variability of the dollar to yen exchange rate and the U.S.-Japan price level ratio. Okay. So you can see that the prices are actually very sticky, right? So because prices are very sticky, so as we assume prices are very sticky, whereas exchange rate is a lot more volatile. Exchange rate is a jump variable. We call it a jump variable because it can easily change. Even within a few seconds. Even within a few seconds, it changes. Okay, it's very efficient. Whereas the price level is sticky because of all these reasons that you have learned in your closed economy macro, right? So there is it's too costly to change the price list of things, right? If you go to a restaurant, they don't change the price of the food every day, right? Because that will cause inconvenience to many people. So the menu costs and all that or that because of contracts, right? Because of wage contracts, right? Or even purchase contracts, right? So when firms purchase goods from each other, they enter into some long-term contract. So the contracted price will not be just changed overnight because you have a long-term contract or wage contract or long-term wage contract that also pins down the stability of the wage. When you have stability of wage, you also have stability of cost, and stability of cost also lead to stability of prices. So that's why price is more sticky. Okay. So this kind of explains justifies our assumption that in the short run price is sticky. Okay? So right. So exchange rates are much more volatile. So so essentially, this is the last slide of chapter 4. So so just to recap everything, right? So we talk about money demand for the economy, for individuals and the economy, and then we derive a money demand function, and then we look at the equilibrium in the money market, and that equilibrium determines the equilibrium interest rate. Okay, so it's a trade-off. So the demand for money is a trade-off between liquidity and return to your asset. Okay, so your monetary asset versus non-monetary asset. Okay, so so the interest rate, the nominal interest rate, is the opportunity cost of holding money. So so we can also say that the money demand is actually the flip side of the demand for interest-bearing assets, right? Precisely because there is a trade-off between liquidity and interest bearing and interest. Okay. When interest rate is higher, people are willing to sacrifice more liquidity. Okay. And therefore they hold less money, right? So suppose there is a one-time permanent increase in money supply. Then we talk about the short-run scenario, right? And then we talk about a long-run scenario. And then there's overshooting because of price stickiness. Because price is sticky, so there is this overshooting. If price were not sticky, that would not be overshooting, as you can see. Because price would immediately adjust. If price immediately adjusts, then the interest rate would not be affected either. Right? So the interest rate is not affected, then you would not have the overshooting. You see? So there are a few things I want to say. First of all is the interest rate. Remember, this all is okay. I think I'm ready to use this thing. Hello, 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 hello. Well, I don't. Okay, now it works. Okay, so there are a few things I want to emphasize. First is R, the interest rate, is nominal interest rate, right? But nominal interest rate minus the expected rate of inflation is equal to the real interest rate, right? So so the real, let's just use R to represent the real interest rate. So this is the real interest rate. This is nominal, right? And this is expected rate of inflation. So so we in the money demand function, this is nominal interest rate, right? So the right, this is negative, this is positive. This is the money demand function. This is opportunity cost of holding money. In our setting, so far, we have been just talking about one-time increase in money supply or one-time change in money supply. And then after that one-time change, if it's permanent, it's a one-time permanent increase in money supply. After that one-time permanent change, the money supply just stays there forever. So since it stays there forever, there's no money growth. If there's no money growth, then the expected rate of inflation will be 0. Okay? Because okay, after a 10% increase in money supply permanently for one, you expect that there's no more change. So you expect in the long run, this is going to be 0. Okay? In our setting, in this setting that we're talking about. So in this case, if there's no ongoing money growth, then R is going to the real interest rate is equal to the nominal interest rate. Okay, so R is equal to R if there is no ongoing money growth. Okay, which is what we assume in the steady state, in the long run steady state. So therefore, the real interest rate would be equal to the nominal interest rate in the long run. So what does that mean? What that means is that, remember, long run neutrality of money, right? So in the long run, money is going to be neutral. That means that the real interest rate will go back to the original level, to the initial state. Your originally, this is also true. Before that one-time permanent change, this is also true. In the long run, in the future, in the long run future, this is also true, right? So in other words, we'll treat the nominal interest rate as real interest rate in our setting. Okay, in both initial state and also the long run steady state. Is that clear? So what it means is that, you would expect the interest rate to go back to the original level. The nominal interest rate go back to the original level in the long run after a permanent one-time increase in money supply. So that is related to your problem set 2, question number 1, which I may go back and talk about in a few minutes, because I feel that I need to talk about it more clearly. I feel that maybe you guys still need some more explanation. I feel. So is that clear? So first of all, this. So that's one thing. Overshooting. Okay, so yeah, I think that is the main thing I want to say. Okay, so long run neutrality of money means that any purely monetary shock will have no real effect in the long run. Okay, which means that all the real variables will go back to the original level in the long run. Okay. So what are these real variables? People ask me. Well, one of these is definitely the real interest rate. But there are also other things, right? Remember when I say real, real variables are referred to, real output, real quantities, okay, and relative prices. So basically, it's just those quantities of goods and services and relative prices of these goods and services. These are the real variables, and they will have to go back to the original level if the shock is purely a monetary shock. Okay, so examples. will be real output. Real output will be unaffected by purely monetary shock. Real interest rate, and also something called real exchange rate, which we have not talked about, right? Real exchange rate. What is real exchange rate? Real exchange rate is basically a relative price. It's the relative price of home good to the price of foreign goods. Okay. When they're expressed in the same currency. Okay. So remember, for example, we have the example of Americans only produce jeans, and British only produce T-shirts, right? So British produce T-shirts, Americans produce jeans. So what the relative price in this case is the price of jeans to price of T-shirt when they are both expressed in dollar prices, or when they are both expressed in pound prices. Okay. So obviously, this relative price is dependent on the exchange rate. Okay, because we assume as long as the prices of the so the relative price of jeans to T-shirts, okay, is equal to the price, the U.S. price of jeans divided by the U.S. price, of course, because the U.S. produces jeans, right? And UK produces T-shirts. Okay, these are the things. So you have the price of T-shirts in UK. Okay, this price is expressed in pound. This price is expressed in U.S. dollar. So you have to multiply this by the so you have to multiply. You have to change this into this into the U.S. price, right? So what is the U.S. price of this guy? It's each pound. How many dollar is each pound, right? So it's the USD per British pound. So how many dollar can each British pound buy? Okay, so this is in pound, right? So to express, you want to express this in the U.S. dollar price, right? So this is an exchange rate. This is exchange rate. Okay, this is the dollar per pound exchange rate, right? And if this is larger, that means that the U.S. dollar depreciates. So okay, so this is the E. This is the E that we talk about. This is the right. This is dollar per pound. Okay, sorry you cannot see. Okay, so this is the E that we see. So so obviously, if these two are constant, given these two constant, then any change in E will affect this real price. But what I'm saying is that this will go back to the same level as before. Okay, in the long run, if this purely monetary shock, then this price level will have to, this relative price will have to go back to the old level. So what it means is, suppose, okay, so a good example is suppose U.S. monetary shock. You have a U.S. monetary shock, permanent monetary shock. In the long run, you increase, let's say, a one-time permanent increase in U.S. money supply by 10%. Then, in the long run, this price is going to rise by 10%, right? You all agree, right? The reason is coming from the quantity theory of money from Milton Friedman, who says that, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, right? So money supply increased by 10% means that in the long run, this is going to increase by 10%. If this increased by 10%, because this has to remain the same, that means that this also has to increase by 10%. Right? This has to increase by 10%. Because this is unchanged, right? Because there's nothing happened to UK money supply. Okay. So in the long run, going back to problem set 2, question number 1, you have to ask yourself, that this has to be, this has to remain the same in the long run because of long run neutrality of money. Does that make sense? Okay. Right. So what are the other real variables? I mean there are lots of real variables really in each economy. I mean the price of apple to the price of orange is a relative price, and it's real. Any relative price will be considered real. The GDP, the real GDP is real, obviously. The real GDP is determined by what? It is determined by the amount of labor, the amount of capital, the technology, okay, the amount of land. This will determine the amount of the GDP, the real GDP of the country. Okay, and these things are not affected by purely monetary shock in the long run. Right? All right. Any questions? Yeah.
So my question is about the expected rate of inflation during the adjustment from the short run to long run. Whether it really keep zero or it is like decreasing and tend to zero.
Yeah, the price level, right? So if you just look at this diagram, there is an adjustment of price level, gradual. So are you asking about this transition? Are you asking about, yeah, so you're asking this transition, right? The price, obviously the price is rising, the price level is rising. So what is the pi e during this in this transition? We try to sidestep this question. We try not to worry about it. So we don't really it's really not that important to us. We will. We don't think it's very important to understand how. I mean, it's very hard to. First of all, it's actually there is no theory for us to sort of pin down how fast this adjustment is. That's why we only talk about the short run versus the long run, just a two end point, just this point and this point, just these two end points. In the middle, there's some adjustment, but how fast is that adjustment? You need more information in order to answer that question. You know what I mean? In other words, what I'm saying is, okay, just now I say, price is sticky, but in the long run, it's still going to adjust, right? In the short run, it's sticky because of this wage contracts, because the manual, it's costly to adjust the manual, or because of this purchase contract that you lock in the price in the short run. But without knowing the detail of this kind of thing in the economy, we cannot know how fast the price adjusts in the transition. So we tend not to worry about it.
So it should be zero at the short run and in the long run.
That's right. In the two endpoints, in the two steady states, they are zero. The pi e are both zero in the two steady states. This is the initial steady state. This is the new steady state. They are both equal to 0. But if you ask me in the middle, what is the pi e? I have no answer. Because that actually you need more information to answer that question. It is a more complicated question. Because you have to know, how frequently, companies adjust the manual price, how is the wage contracts, I mean, how long are the wage contracts, and how frequently they renew the wage contract. I mean, that's a lot of very complicated things there. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Right. Okay. Okay. So let me see here. Maybe I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about the problem set 2, in case you still have questions about problem set 2. Oh, I see. Here we have a problem set 2. That's the key. Okay, so problem set 2 and the key. Okay. All right. So this is the question, right? You still remember, right? So I ask you to draw 4 diagrams. So first, so basically, this is a permanent one-time reduction in the aggregate real money demand, and then the question is, reduction, right? Yeah, the reduction. So one-time permanent reduction. So the money demand schedule shift in. So I asked you to explain how the exchange rate and the interest rate change in the short and long run, and then draw a diagram. And then compare with the situation when the reduction in the money demand function is temporary instead. So, so here's the main thing here, right? So we have a diagram, this diagram. We have this diagram here. So 2 things. You have this shifting in, and then this shifting out, because this shifts in just because of the assumption of the question. This shifts out because now this shifts out. It's a little bit more tricky, right? So do you know it shifts out because EE increases, but then why EE increases? You ask why E increases, right? So you ask why V increases, then you kind of look at this and say, okay, this has to remain the, well, here we're talking about, right. So in the long run, right? So EE will be the expected future exchange rate in the future. So that's the long run. So EE basically is a long run exchange rate that you expect to take place. And it will be, in the long run, this is going to be unchanged. So you will ask yourself, this is constant, right? So I'm talking about this being foreign, this being home, okay? So this is probably going to change, and these 2 are probably going to change. The question is whether this is going to increase or decrease, okay? So ask yourself whether it's going to increase or decrease. This is the challenge of the question, okay? But the question also, you also know that this is actually going to be going back to the original level in the long run. So just imagine if this shift out, if this shifts in, then the interest rate will fall. Then in the long run, you expect it to go back to the original level, right? Because of long run neutrality of money. And therefore, the only way to make this going back to our original level is for price to increase. The price must increase in order for the interest rate to go back to the original level in the long run. So price must increase. If price increase, that means that this will increase. This is the home price level. This will increase. If this increase, this also increase by the same amount. If this increased by 10%, this also increased by 10%. Right? So that's the logic behind this. Okay? Now, intuitively, what does that mean? Well, intuitively, so here the tricky thing is we talk about a decrease in money demand function. So now you begin to realize that a decrease in demand of money works almost exactly like an increase in money supply. Okay, it's relative, right? So increase in money supply and demand for money doesn't change, then you have an increase in price in the long run. But if money supply doesn't change, but there's a decrease in money demand, you also have similar effect. You have the price also have to rise. The reason is because people don't demand as much money as before. In real terms, people don't need that much money for the same amount, for the same price level. People don't demand as much money as before. So there's excess supply of money. Right? So therefore, the price must rise in order to sort of balance the supply and demand for money at the same interest rate. At the same interest rate, there is excess supply of money. Therefore, price and real money, I have to say, in real terms, there's excess supply of money in real terms, and therefore the price must rise so that the demand for money will be equal to supply of money. Okay, so in other words, this thing, so what happened is that this function has shifted down, or has decreased, okay? So this function has decreased, and so money supply. So in equilibrium, money supply has to be so in equilibrium, MS must be equal to MD, right? This is the money market equilibrium. So therefore, you can replace it by S as well, right? In equilibrium, this has to be true. In the money market equilibrium, this has to be true. And so if this falls, then because there's no change to MS, there's no change in MS. So this must rise in order for this thing to fall. Because this is going to be unchanged and this is going to be unchanged. These two things are unchanged in the long run. Right? So this is unchanged, and if this is unchanged, then this will fall because of the shifting from L1 to L2. So P must rise because this is also unchanged. Right? So P must rise. And so that's the argument, right? So if this fall increases, that means this increases. Okay, so I now write this as P, okay, and this as the foreign price. I call it P star. Let's call it, and then we have the E here, right? So this is the domestic price level. This is the foreign price level. This is the exchange rate. So this is going to be unchanged in the long run. So if this increases, this also increases. If this increased by X%, this also increased by X%. Right? So therefore, in the long run, because this increased by X%, therefore EE also increases by X%. You see, in the long run. So therefore. EE also increased by X%. So that explains why the L curve shifts from L1 to L2. Okay. Does that make sense? So the rest is just quite mechanical, right? So you just out falls initially. So that's overshooting, obviously. From this exchange rate E1, you have overshooting to E3, and then you settle at the long run level at E4. Okay, does that make sense? Now let me ask you a question. Why would the money demand function, why would there be, can you tell me some example or some justification why in the real world, why there can be a permanent reduction in the money demand function in the real world? Can you give me some example some explanation why in the economy that can happen?
More people use electronic payments.
More people use electronic payments. That means they keep less money.
Less cash.
Less cash, but they still keep money in their savings account, I suppose. So is that money? Is savings account money money? I think it is still money in our definition. It's still money. It has a lot of liquidity actually. So if you include savings account money as demand for money, that doesn't affect the demand for money. But you're getting close actually. In fact, in financial now the financial innovation has there's more and more financial innovation. So now in fact, even if you're keeping bonds, some bonds actually allow you to very easily convert into money with very little risk. Well, with relatively less risk, I would say. There's still risk there, but usually the bonds in some mutual fund companies, okay, you can buy bond funds, right? You can buy stock funds, bond funds, and you can even write checks. You even write checks against your bond funds. All right. So checks are almost as good as money, right? So you can use your check to pay many things, and if you can write check against a bond fund account, that actually give people incentive not to keep money in the savings account. They actually want to keep it in a bond fund account because it's earning interest. You see, even though there's some risk there, of course. I mean, it's not sure return, right? So bond price will rise and fall, but still, that actually gives people incentive. Okay. In the olden days, this is not possible. Okay. So this is basically financial innovation. Okay. So making it much easier to convert interest-bearing assets into liquid money. Okay. In other words, liquidate. It's easier to liquidate interest-bearing asset. Okay. So, right. All right. So, yeah. So essentially, that is the question. Is there any question about this particular question? So as a result, we have this, So we have this, right? There's overshooting, and then the interest rate falls and then rise, and then price will gradually rise, but the money supply is unchanged. So this is like that, okay? that clear? When it's temporary, it's actually much easier. It's temporary. It doesn't affect the expected. The EE doesn't. The E is not affected, right? So you just have just one. It just go back in the next period. The exchange rate just go back in the next period. So temporary is very easy because we assume that the change will go back. There's no more change. The change will just be reverted in the next period. Because there's no distinction between short and long run anymore. If it's just temporary change, there's no distinction between short and long run because there's no long run. It's temporary. There's no long run. So everything is short run. So this price is horizontal. This is horizontal. Interest rate is just a one time, and then go back to original level. Does that make sense? So basically that is the first question. Is there any further question on that? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Why is like the for temporary decrease? Why is like the EE a slope for temporary?
Why is the slope?
Why is it not like a digital function?
So you will argue that let's see. Why is it not? Why is it what?
Why is it like a slope decreasing backwards?
So you're talking about this diagram, right?
Yeah,
So you're saying that you're saying that it would be what?
I'm actually not too sure, but I don't understand why it's going down like this.
Do you think it's going down?
No, why would it be like why would there be a slope?
A sharp? You mean that why there's a sharp fall?
Not a sharp fall, like
Are you talking about this downward sloping part?
yeah. Why is it downward sloping but not like flat and then all of a sudden down?
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're okay. Yeah, you may be right. Yeah, that's just a minor detail. This is just a minor detail. All I want to say is that it will just rise temporarily and then fall back in the next period. Yeah. You may be right that yeah. This is discrete time, so yeah, both are okay. If you're in the exam, it doesn't matter as long as you tell me that it's a one-time increase and then going back in the next period. That's fine. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. I also have a question about the graph.
Yeah.
Actually, I guess the line between the E1 and E2 should be the dash line, not the real one. Because in the slide, it's a dash line.
Oh.
Yeah, if there is suddenly increase in
Oh.
yes, should it be a dash line? So if there's
Okay. Right. Yeah, you may say it's a dash line. Yeah. Yeah. Again, this is minor detail. To me, it's not essential. Yeah. Dash line. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. It happens simultaneously. I mean, it happens immediately, right away. So yeah. Right. Okay. Any other? Yeah.
How long is the time between T log and T log as well?
Yeah. This again. We have to go into. I don't have a good answer to that. It's just a. If let's say anything less than a year, I would say anything less than like 6 months or something like that, I would say that is temporary. Yeah, that's the kind of time frame that I'm thinking about. 6 months, a year. If that money supply increase just lasts for that long, I kind of think of it as being short run. I mean, being temporary. So yeah, something like that. This is an abstract model, so I don't have a very definite answer to that. Yeah, it's a conceptual model. Yeah, but yeah, about anything less than a year would be because the price level would have to adjust very slowly. So about a year is still kind of a short time for the price to adjust and yeah. something like that. Yeah. Okay. Let me see if there is anything. Okay, so that is the question number 1, right? So and then question number 2. Question number 2 about question number 2 is actually very easy, right? I don't think I need to. I don't think I need to go through it. Is there any question about number 2? No question about number 2, right? So number 3 is it's also I suppose it's actually kind of easy, unless you unless you have any question. So so here is the answer, right? So is there any question for question number 3? Any query? Okay, no queries, right? Very good. Okay, so that sort of finished the chapter. I mean the problem set. I also want to tell you. So next Tuesday, right? We're going to go to two classrooms in the academic building because they don't have a classroom large enough for all of us. So the two classrooms, and then we're going to post a seating plan on Canvas on a day before, hopefully maybe even earlier. Yeah, but so you should go and find out where the room is, okay, and don't wait till the last minute. Don't just go there without knowing where it is in advance, because that would take a long time, and I would not give you any extra time for claiming that you cannot find a room, you know. So you have to go and find a room well in advance, well in advance, okay, at least the day before, and then what else? Yeah, that's basically mostly what I want to say about it. And then to prepare for the midterm, in fact, even for the multiple choice question, I think it will be useful for you to refer to some the end of chapter question that I've posted those the suggested answers to some end of chapter questions, right? So those questions are actually very useful for you to practice. Because even the multiple choice questions, it will actually help you to do the multiple choice questions by attempting those end of chapters. So not just long questions, but also multiple choice questions. It will be useful to try to attempt those end of chapter questions and understand the answer, why the answer is like that. Okay. So so basically that's all I want to say. Are there any other questions? Any question about problem set 1? No more question, right? So, well, if you want, I mean, I can sort of quickly. So here is this problem set 1, first question. I think this question has been discussed many times. Unless you have really have some more questions, but yeah, don't be shy. If you still have questions, please ask now. Okay, no more. And then question 2. These are I've already gone through all these things. So unless you really have questions, I won't go through it. Okay, all right.
Indeed, I have a question.
Yeah.
About the problem set for the last question.
Oh.
Because I asked you in the office hour that about regarding the transportation cost, it should be constant regardless of the exchange rate fluctuation. So I wonder if in other cases, like in tariff, should tariff be subjected to the exchange rate fluctuation as well?
So this question, right?
Yes.
So, okay. So here, what is your question again?
Because in the office hour, you said that the transportation cost should remain constant, and regardless of the exchange rate fluctuation.
Right.
So I'm asking if in other cases like tariff, will it be subjected to other exchange rate fluctuation?
No, tariff will not be affected by the exchange rate.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Very good. So I think I will like to move on to chapter 5. Chapter 5. Chapter 5. Good. Right. So this chapter is, as I said, our model is still building up. It becomes more and more sophisticated, right? In chapter 4, we have talked about how EE is determined. But it's not very rigorous. It's not a very rigorous treatment, okay? In this chapter, we're going to build a more sophisticated explanation of how the long term is determined, okay? In particular, how, for example, the EE is determined when the shock is when there are different kinds of shocks, right? So in chapter 4 we just talked about purely monetary shock, right? But in this chapter we're going to look at both purely monetary shock and some sort of non-monetary shock as well. Okay, so the reason why we want to this chapter is actually very important because we need to know the long run. Okay, the long run is going to affect the short run because your expectation about the long run will affect your short run behavior. So that's very important. Okay, so we assume that the market participants are they're rational. They know all the information, so they know the model as well as anybody. So we just make that kind of assumption. So agents are rational. They have full information. Okay. So basically that's the idea here. So we begin with something called law of one price. Okay. So let's see. So we're going to talk about something called the purchasing power parity, okay? And then we'll describe how monetary factors affect exchange rate in the long run, which we talked a little bit about. But then we haven't talked about the concept of real exchange rate. I actually introduced that idea here. Basically, this is the idea of real exchange rate. Real exchange rate is just the it's very similar. Okay, so in fact this will be an example of a real exchange rate. So it's the real variable. Tells you the relative prices of goods in the two countries, and then so understand the factors that affect real exchange rates and relative currency prices in the long run, which I actually explained a little bit, and then. This will be about the real interest rate differences. Okay, so basically that's the idea. Okay, so let me think about one more thing. It just occurred to me that there's one more thing I want to ask you about. You also require to understand the. I'm going back to the midterm again. You also need to understand this set of notes that I posted on Canvas, right? So what is money and some treatment about the quantity theory of money, velocity money and things like that. Okay, so so that is required as well. Okay. All right, so log run price and then purchasing power parity and all that. So what models can predict how exchange rates behave? So in the last chapter, we developed a short model and a long model. Okay. So we're going to study in more detail. Okay. So right, this is exactly what I just said, right? What to expect about the future will affect you. Okay, so let's try to have some interesting quiz here. Okay, so 2 blanks for you to fill in. The law of one price simply says that the same good in different competitive markets must sell for the same price when what cost and what between those markets are not important. Actually, I forgot what my answer is, but, but let's try it, right? Let's try it. So what are the, yeah.
Transaction cost.
Transaction costs and what between those markets are not important? What do you think?
What does production cost?
Production cost? No, I don't think production cost is should be there. Transaction cost, I think transaction cost should be a good answer. But there are 2 things here. And what? Tariffs? Oh, okay, fine, okay. Right. How about transport costs? Should also be transaction cost can. Yeah, I mean transport cost is maybe another element, right? So so shipping, there's no transport cost and no transaction cost. That the goods in different competitive markets sell for the same price, right? Right. So so the example, good example is that if you have two shops that are just across the streets, or just 2 shops next to each other, then same country, then you expect the prices of the same good must almost be exactly the same, because consumers will know the difference, right? So if you're across countries, then it's a little bit more complicated because you have a transport cost, right? It takes time to go from one place to another, and that may be yeah. I mean, transport cost in a sense is also transaction cost in this case, right? Because in order to buy the other good, you have to go. So that's kind of transaction cost, yeah, artificial trade barriers. Actually, that is also a good point. Yeah. So if there's tariffs, once you have across the countries, then you have to talk about tariffs. So suppose that no such thing happen, no such thing exists. So I think the rest is actually very easy, right? So you have the pizza, identical with identical restaurant, then obviously, well, in this case, okay, so you so why? Okay, let me ask you why should the price be the same? If they're not the same, then what happened? Yeah.
People will buy things at a low price and sell it at purchase with higher price and third.
Okay, so this is called arbitrage, right? So do you expect the arbitrage of pizza in this case? I mean, in the real world, I don't think people will arbitrage pizza, right? So nobody will buy. But there must be some other mechanism going on other than arbitrage. I agree with you. Arbitrage is one possibility. So suppose the iPhone, right? So iPhone, the price of an iPhone is pretty much uniform across the world. Last time I checked, the price of an iPhone in Hong Kong is about the same as the price of iPhone in the US. Because otherwise there will be arbitrage, right? It's a very expensive item and it can be easily, put in a pocket and people fly from San Francisco to Hong Kong, they just take with them and then you can arbitrage. So that the price is pretty much uniform for the iPhone. So that is arbitrage, I think. That can be arbitrage. But the pizza, you don't arbitrage pizza. But then why? Why would the pizza price be the same? It's not arbitrage, right? It's what? Some other things going on. Well, everybody will just go and patronize the low-priced restaurant, and the high-priced restaurant is going out of business. So they just have to lower the price. It's a competitive pressure, basically. It's not just arbitrage. So it's either the movement of goods or movement of people. Okay? Movement of goods, but arbitrage is a movement of goods. But in this case, it's movement of people. People, the customers can move also. You have customers can move, then you can also equalize the price, right? So, all right. Yeah, so this is just very simple. Now, we talk about across countries, right? Across countries, now, so, again, it can be competitive pressure as well. Competitive pressure, right? So here's an example of Seattle and Vancouver. Seattle is in the U.S. and Vancouver is in Canada. They're actually quite far away, frankly. I mean, they're like I think 3 hours drive. It's very far away, but they're sufficiently close that people can actually go from one place to another, and so this is, here you have a movement of people here. So okay, according to the law of one price, if you believe if the transaction cost is trivial, then you would expect the price of pizza in the U.S. in U.S. price should be equal to the price of pizza in U.S. dollar price. Okay, everything has to be expressed in the same currency. Okay. So basically, this is the law of one price. Law of one price. Okay, nothing fancy here. Nothing fancy here. So basically, So sometimes people will say something like, the exchange rate based on purchasing power parity. They use this kind of relationship to kind of ask the question about whether the actual exchange rate is overpriced or underpriced. So you have this so-called Big Mac index, right? You heard of this Big Mac index. So the Economist magazine, they have this Big Mac index. They publish it every once in a while. Okay, so they look at the price of hamburger. Okay, and then they say, okay, is the currency overvalued or undervalued, right? So this is actually just for fun. So they have this. Let me see here. I think we have this somewhere. Okay, somewhere in. Yeah, we have McDonald's here, right? We have McDonald's here, and then here's the Big Mac index. So right, so they say, okay, now what is the Big Mac? The price of the Big Mac in local currency? In the U.S., a Big Mac costs you $4.37. This is January 2013, which is actually quite a long time ago. It's already more than 6 years, almost 7 years ago. And that's a $4.37 in the United States. In Hong Kong, it's only $2.19 US dollar. If you express it in US dollar, this Hong Kong dollar price is 17, but the US dollar price is $2.19. So obviously you can arbitrage, right? But do people arbitrage hamburger? I think people probably don't. but this is just for fun. That's right. I mean, it kind of, but it just tells you. People say, okay, perhaps the Hong Kong dollar is what? It should be, you know, it's undervalued. Okay, according to this. Otherwise there should be arbitrage of hamburger, so it should be more expensive, right? So 17 Hong Kong dollars should actually be worth more US dollar. So Hong Kong dollar is undervalued, severely undervalued actually, according to this. Okay, and then you can also have other things, other countries. So, of course, this example actually tells you that in the real world, well, one price does not always hold, right? Because transport cost is not zero, transaction cost is not zero, right? And this kind of thing, right? So, but then but it's a good starting point for us to look at this issue. Because later on we're going to sort of modify this law of one price, right? As I said, I mean there are this competitive, the market force will tend to move the exchange rate towards the kind of law of one price level, even though it's not exactly correct, but there's a force that tends to equalize them. You see, just like that, my example of iPhone, okay, it tells you that the law of one price sometimes holds better, right? But then people will say, okay, so suppose I don't believe in law of one price. This is what we call so we don't believe in law of one price for every good, because some goods are just simply not arbitrageable, and all that. The transport cost is expensive or something. But then how about in overall, you know, the baskets of goods? Okay, so can we say, okay, there's a whole basket of goods in one country and another, the same basket of goods in another country. Should we expect law of one price to hold? What do you think? Huh? No. Probably no, right? Because if it's one for one, it doesn't hold, then the whole basket probably also doesn't hold. It probably doesn't hold, right? Therefore, if this, instead of the price of pizza, if you replace it by the price level of goods in another country, this will be a version of it's not called law of one price anymore. It's called absolute purchasing power parity. Okay, so instead of using the good by good, you just replace the price of pizza by the price of a basket of goods, of a representative basket of goods. Okay, so the representative basket of goods will be the price index, right? Would be like consumer price index, right? So that if you use the price index in place of the price of goods, that is called the absolute PPP, absolute purchasing power parity. But that, as you said, probably doesn't hold either, right? There are many reasons why it doesn't hold. First of all, of course, good by good probably doesn't hold. Some goods holds better than others, but still. But then there's also another problem. If you talk about price index, can anybody tell me what's the additional problem? So even if every single good obeys law of one price, just assume that, okay? Suppose that every single good obeys law of one price. But then if you talk about the index, so in other words, if I'm saying, okay, so if I talk about index, right? Replace it by purchasing power parity. This is called purchasing power parity. This is the price index, okay? This will be called absolute per PVP, absolute purchasing power parity. Now, my question is, suppose log 1 price actually holds for all goods. Do you expect this to hold? Why?
I think because like the importance of the same goods varies in different countries. For example, say
Right.
in Hong Kong, people may value housing more, and in US, people may value burger more. And then when you calculate the index, it takes account, takes the points into account.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's good. So that's right. So the basket actually is different, frankly. I mean, the different countries have a different basket when they calculate the price index. As you said, different countries evaluate the consumption pattern is different. If you're looking at consumer price index, so in the U.S. or Canada, the price of an automobile is obviously important for the consumption bundle. In Hong Kong, not everybody have a car, and they don't necessarily need a car. So the price of automobile will have carry less weight in a Hong Kong consumer price index. Okay, so that's the reason. So two reasons why absolute purchasing power parity would not hold. Okay, but then people say, okay, fine. Absolute PV doesn't hold. Okay, let's think about something. See whether this makes sense. Okay, so we know absolute PV probably doesn't hold. But what about let's have a weaker version of this? How about looking at the change? The change. Okay, so suppose we have the percentage change of this is equal to the percentage change of that. Okay, so this is a weaker version of purchasing power parity. Okay, and it's called relative PPP. Okay, so if you say, okay, well, maybe that is, makes some sense now, right? Because we just talk about change, right? So why would that make more sense? Because there are forces, that affect if there's some force that affect the, this inflation, in some sense, this is inflation rate, right? This will be the rate of change of this will be inflation rate in Canada. This rate of change is inflation in the U.S. And then this will be the change. This will be the change in the exchange rate between the two countries. So it seems that it begins to make a little bit more sense. So what it means is that, in fact, what that means, the absolute PVP there, if it holds, actually means that this so-called real exchange rate is actually equal to 1. So here, maybe we have to kind of modify this a little bit. But this is real exchange rate. So now, for this to be true, that this real exchange rate is really 1, but we have no reason to believe that it's equal to 1, right? But we can say, okay, what about if this is just a constant? Okay, if this is a constant, then maybe that kind of makes sense, right? So maybe, in the long run, this is going to be a constant. Okay, so maybe that can serve as a model for the long run equilibrium. Okay, so we just look at the percentage change. Maybe that can serve as a model for the long run equilibrium, because what that implies is what? What it implies is that this relative price is just constant. It doesn't have to be equal. Okay, so right. So absolute PVC at principal parity, that will be absolute. But the relative PVP will say, okay, I look at the percentage change of the left-hand side, and it should be equal to the percentage change on the right-hand side. So why do I say this is the percentage on the right-hand side? It's nothing more than it's some mathematics, right? So you have E is equal to P US divided by P EU. Okay, so here we have this. This is absolute. This is absolute PVP. But this, a weak conversion of PVP would be saying, okay, the percentage change in E is equal to the percentage change in this thing. Okay? The percentage change on the left-hand side is equal to the percentage on the right-hand side, but this, in fact, itself is equal to this minus the change in PEU divided by PEU. Approximately. So this is approximation. So this is true when we are talking about infinitesimal change, right? So in other words, what it comes from is that if z is equal to x times y, then dz is equal to dx x plus dy divided by y. Okay, but here we have if d is small, okay. If dy is all these d, this change is small. So this is the approximation, okay. So this is where it comes from. So the change, the relative PVP says the change in the exchange rate equals changes in prices between two periods. Okay. Now, so here, I'm trying to say that what that implies is that this relative price is a constant. So this corresponds, if this actually holds, it corresponds to saying that this relative price is a constant. Okay. So we're going to explain why this is true. Oh, I'm running out of time. So to give you some. Okay, so I think it's better for me to stop here because it's just I don't have time to go any further. So basically, I hope you can sort of when you go home, you read the rest of the chapter, so get the idea, right? So why is it that the relative PVP is equivalent to this relative price is constant, okay? So when this holds, that means the relative price is actually equal to 1, but when this holds, that is a constant. Okay? That's all. So I'll see you next week. If you have any question about preparing for the exam, just let me know. Okay? All right. Thank you.